How do you get your good tenants to stay longer? We all know that as a landlord and property manager, there's nothing better than having a wonderful tenant in your property. Life is just so much easier. Everything runs smoothly. You probably sometimes don't even hear from the tenant because they're just so perfect. So I think there are 3 things that you need to have in order to find a good tenant. One is to make sure you do all the referencing and viewings to make sure you find a good tenant. Number 2 is to make sure the property is in really good condition so the tenants don't leave. And number 3 is you. How are you interacting with your tenants? So let's dive into all those 3 areas in a little bit more detail. Now, as I said, the first thing was finding a good tenant in the first place. So what is a good tenant? In my opinion, with having dealt with lots of tenants over the years on behalf of landlords and property managers, estate agents, letting agents, everybody's different. We've all got different personalities, and, where we get on with people is all different. But a good tenant, in my opinion, and the opinion people I've worked with, is someone who you're able to get along with, easy to communicate with. If there's any issues, they report them to you immediately. They don't wait. They're working their property. They keep the property well. They treat the property as if it's their own, as opposed to a rental property. They look after, the interior of the property. If there's anything that they would like to do, like putting up, painting a room or putting up pictures and things, they'll ask your permission. They're very courteous and polite, and also they get on very well with the neighbors. There's nothing worse than having a tenant who makes loads and loads of noise, and the neighbors are complaining. They don't put their bins out on time. They're always they're keeping the whole road an absolute mess because they're not putting their food rubbish in the food bins, and they're not recycling properly. So a really good tenant is all of those things. So when you get a good tenant, you want to make sure you keep them. So when we're doing viewings, after you've advertised the property, you'll be speaking to them, you'll be interacting with them. When you're doing viewings, it's wise to be able to, open days are great. Don't get me wrong. Open days are wonderful. You get loads and loads of people in at the same time. But obviously since COVID, it's very, it's not as likely to get, everybody all in one room at one time. So try and book your viewings, every 10 to 15 minutes. So you have like a little bit of a gap so you can get to speak to each individual person and have kind of build a rapport with them. You're then able to ask them questions. Why are they moving? What attracted them to this property? What do they do for work? What are their current salaries? Those kind of questions can kind of weed out people who aren't working, who don't have any money necessarily, who don't necessarily have a very good track record. I know you can't really discriminate, and obviously you want to have the right people. So you want to be able to go with your gut. How do you feel about the person? Because obviously during lockdown, lots of people, in UK anyway, have gone on universal credit because obviously they weren't able to work, or they had, specific disabilities, or maybe they've just come into the country. So, we need to, make sure we're accommodating everybody. So, how do you get on with them? What kind of feelings are you getting from them? Sometimes you can't always rely on your feelings because, we all have different ways of handling things and, talking to people, but what kind of rapport are you building with this person you're doing a viewing with? Do you get along with them? Are you does everything seem kosher? Does everything seem like what they're saying sounds truthful? You do get a lot of con artists. They're very good at what they do in terms of conning people, so just be very wary when you're doing viewings. But then the next point is referencing. So once you've decided this person is good, you make them pay ultimately a holding deposit to save the room, to stop the property from continuing being marketing. So you stop the property from being marketed, and you do referencing. Now you can either do referencing yourself, or you can get a referencing company to do it for you. Whichever option you choose, just make sure that is thorough. Obviously if you do the referencing yourself, it's quicker. You get to speak to all the referencees, if that's the correct terminology, and you get to get all the information directly to you. But that depends if you have a lot more time on your hands in order to do the referencing, or you can give write out in your standard operating procedures what you're looking for in terms of your references, and hand that over to your virtual assistant or your team member, whoever you have in your team, to be able to do the referencing for you. If you have a referencing company to do it, then that's wonderful. You can just give the tenant directly over to the referencing company and they will do all the referencing for you. Now, in terms of referencing, there's so much different types of information you can get, but generally, from working with the clients that I have worked with, we generally obviously get their name, their current address, you get a copy of their passport, or getting a share code from I keep thinking of HMRC, but it's not HMRC, it's the government anyway, to make sure that they can stay in the country, because you've got to do the correct right to rent to make sure people are allowed to be in the country. You find out, speak to their previous landlord, speak to their current employer, do a credit check. And sometimes you can't always get to speak to someone's employer, especially if it's like the NHS or the police. Their referencing takes absolutely forever. So in order to cross that barrier, if you get a copy of their contract and at least 3 months pay slips, or some people like to ask for 3 months bank statements. It depends which the tenant is comfortable with. Sometimes the tenants are like, that's all my personal details, I don't want to give you all my personal details. You can be a bit wary of people like that, who don't necessarily want to give you their personal details, because you need to work out, especially if they're living in their overdraft, and they're really bad with their money, they only have like £100 at the end of the month, they're always in their overdraft. How are they going to be able to afford to pay your rent? Saying that, I live in my overdraft, but let's not go into that. So we need to make sure that we have good credit checks for our tenants, and also we need to make sure that when you're asking questions in the viewing, which I forgot to mention earlier, ask them if they've got any faults on their credit history. Do they have a CCJ? Have they ever been bankrupt? Because when it comes to doing their credit check, if they don't own up to things like that, then it's a bit telling what else could they be hiding from you. So when you're doing their credit check, sometimes people don't know they've got a CCJ. We did have a tenant not too long ago who didn't even know they had a CCJ, and they were actually quite grateful for us for finding it, so that they could then go and pay it off and then work out exactly how to resolve the issue. Those who do have CCJs normally have a payment plan, or it's paid off, or something like that. So those are kind of things you need to work out. So make sure you've got, in order to get a good tenant, make sure you do the appropriate referencing, to make sure that the tenant you have is the right one for you and for the property. Example I have of a wonderful tenant. So I've done loads and loads of tenant referencing in all my time of being a virtual assistant, and there was one time when a tenant, we communicated with them, they paid their holding fee, they completed all of their referencing documents within literally 3 hours, and then during the course of the process of doing the referencing, they were checking in more with us than we was with them. Pretty much the next day they were like, so how did it go? Is there anything you're waiting for? The day after that, is there anything you're waiting for? What kind of information do you need? What is outstanding? And literally their referencing was done like within 4 days. That's probably a bit long in most cases, but still, because they work for the NHS, we had to kind of go round and find alternative ways to get their employment reference done without having to necessarily speak with their employer, because when it comes to NHS, it takes absolutely forever. But sometimes when you're doing referencing for tenants, you can kind of work out in their communication what kind of tenant they're going to be. Sometimes if they're very quick, very, very quick on getting all the referencing done, they're eager to move into the property, they're very eager to move, they're efficient. When they move into the property, the property is maintained and is really nice. With this specific tenant, she's still in the property today, she's absolutely lovely, get on really well. If there's anything that needs fixing, we tend to it straight away, because we want to keep her as a tenant. So you're gonna get little examples of this. The more referencing you do, the easier it is for you to be able to spot what kind of tenant they're going to be later on down the line. You don't want to make assumptions, but let's face it, we all make assumptions, we all judge people, it's part of life. So yes, the more referencing you do, the easier it is to kind of work out what kind of tenant they're going to be later on. The next point is number 2, having a good property. Now, we all know what a high-end property is, what a mid-range property is, and what a low-end property is. I'm talking mainly about residential properties. I'm talking about single lets as well as HMO properties. Now, single lets, a family, an individual, a person has the whole property to themselves. Was it 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, kitchen, dining room, front room, the whole property to themselves. When you have a house of multiple occupation, the person, a tenant, is renting just, one room. Sometimes they have an ensuite, sometimes they have a studio within the property, and they then, sometimes if they just have the bedroom and the ensuite, then they share the reception area and the kitchen with everybody else. Or sometimes if they literally just have the bedroom, then they're sharing the kitchen and the bathroom and the garden with everybody else in the property. So when you have a good property, it is clean, all the furniture looks like it's been well maintained, well looked after. It doesn't necessarily look used. There may be a little bit of scuffs if it's in a HMO. Sometimes you may have a little bit of scuffs on the wall, but it's not so obvious and not so large to the point where the room looks messy and untidy. Before a tenant moves in, the property is cleaned, it's professionally cleaned. You've done an inventory of the property, so when the tenant eventually moves in, you found a really good person, you get along well with them, they move in, the property looks really nice, it smells nice, it's fresh, it's clean. If you're providing things like bedding and curtains and those kind of things, those things smell fresh, they look good. The bed is not stained, the mattress is not disgusting and filthy. My gosh, HMOs are a thing. Sometimes those mattresses are okay. We're not going to talk about that anymore. We're just going to say, make sure the mattresses look like you'd want to sleep on them yourself. Let's just start off the tenancy as we mean it to go on. Let's just start the tenancy as we'd like to receive the property back, whether that is a HMO property or a single let property. Because when a tenant moves in, they see the pictures on Rightmove, Zoopla, Spare Room, they're thinking, my gosh, that property looks gorgeous. I want to see it. It's gorgeous. They go and see it. It's exactly like the pictures. They move in. It's exactly the model home that they were thinking of. And then, as they see that, they're enticed to move in. They're enticed. They love it. And hopefully they'll treat it exactly as their home, which is obviously what we want as a property manager or the landlord. We want the tenant to feel comfortable, to feel at home, to feel like, this is a place I want to spend, my life, basically. So in having a good property, it'll be nice if you have a welcome pack for them, give them a thank you card, thank you for being my tenant, give them milk, a few groceries, depending on your budget. Let's face it, depends on your budget as the landlord or the property manager, what you have in the welcome pack when they're going to move in. Now, obviously, throughout their tenancy, in order to have, keep a good tenant, you need to make sure that all the furniture is good. So, as soon as they move in, they lay on the bed and it breaks. No, we don't want that. As soon as they hang up their clothes in the wardrobe, the rail breaks. We don't want that. So just make sure that although the property, looks good and the furniture look good, just make sure it's durable and that it will last throughout their tenancy and hopefully, the next couple of tenancies along the way. So, property maintenance is one thing you definitely need to keep on top of when you have a good tenant, but we'll go on to that in the next part. So in case you weren't aware, my name is Tanya and I'm a virtual assistant and online business manager. I work with lots of small businesses within the property industry, those being property managers, estate agents, letting agents, surveyors, mortgage brokers, all those kind of industries. I work with them in their back office, supporting them so they can be the front face of their businesses. I work in their business so that they can concentrate on the areas that they enjoy doing and the areas that really generate money for their business. So for example, I can work on booking meetings for them, speaking to their customers on their behalf, doing their marketing for them. It all depends on the type of business, because as you know, each business's administration is completely different, and as a role as a virtual assistant, take on all the tasks that is needed. So whether it's repetitive tasks, one-off tasks, small little projects, virtual assistants is more task-led. It's more led by the business owner. They pretty much tell me as a virtual assistant what they need to be done. Whereas an online business manager, we kind of go in as almost like a director level, managerial level, where that you understand the business, you gain an understanding of how the business is run from a marketing perspective, from a finance perspective, from employee perspective. So you can assist them in managing their employees. You can assist them in strategies for making the business grow, helping them implement those strategies. You can be speaking to their clients on their behalf in order to generate more work, or understand their clients. Your work is reactive. You do things in advance. You don't necessarily have to wait for the business owner to tell you what to do. You are more involved in the business on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to just taking the tasks. So if you need any help in your business, please send me an email. My name is Tanya Day, and my email address is tanya@clearviewadministration.co.uk. And the third part in able to keep a good tenant is you, the individual, the person, or your team, or whoever are going to be interacting with your tenants, with your good tenants. So by being you need to be friendly, courteous, polite, but professional. These tenants are not necessarily your friends, they're not your family. Treat them on a professional level, and they will hopefully treat you exactly the same way. When it comes to responding to messages, calls, try and be as efficient as you can. If you've time blocked and you've got specific times of the day when you as an individual respond back, then respond back during those times. But if it's going to be very late in the evening, then send them a message just saying I'm going to respond back, or have an autoresponder on your email so that they know that these are the certain times that you're going to respond back to their messages. Or if you're not able to constantly answer your phone every 5 minutes that it's ringing, then have a call answering service so that someone is able to answer your phones and then send you the text message or the email of the person who called. You just need to make sure that the person, your tenant, feels comfortable in knowing that the communication is getting through to you. If you have a team, then make sure that your team or your virtual assistant responds back to all of your tenants in a timely manner. There's nothing worse than waiting for a call, or having put a call in to somewhere and then either be left hanging on the phone for absolutely ages, or the call drops off, or you're just never responded back to. So respond to all messages in a timely fashion. And also when it comes to maintenance issues, we all know there's emergency issues and there's non-emergency issues. The sink is leaking, it's pouring on the floor, emergency. The carpet is pulling up in a corner, not an emergency. The light bulb has gone, mate, do it yourself. You've got fingers, you've got hands, you can put a stool up, you can stand on a chair, you can change a bulb. Unless of course it's one of those really integrated light bulbs where you need to get a specialist to come. But obviously when it comes to maintenance issues, you need to get as much detail as possible. The more detail you have, the easier it will be for you to be able to respond. Now there are lots of maintenance apps out there for you to be able to give to your tenants, for them to be able to give you as much information as possible. Or you could literally just relay to the tenant when they've said they've got an issue. If they relay the issue to you via the phone or via email or via the specific app, make sure you've asked them exactly what the issue is. Can they take a picture? Can they take a video? Where is it in the house? What is the state of the current issue? How is it affecting them at that time? Because when you have all those details, then you're able to find the appropriate tradesman to be able to help you solve that issue. Now, when it comes to emergencies, you need to be able to fix those issues either on the day or within the next, 2 or 3 days. When it comes to other issues, smaller issues, depending upon the size of your portfolio that you're looking after, perhaps you can batch all those issues together and, get your tradesman to go and fix those issues, on a collective day, to fix all of them at the same time. Because sometimes, where I'm working at the moment, there's, fridges are going going, left, right and center. They're all breaking down at one time. So, with those kind of things, it's kind of an emergency, kind of not an emergency, because in the summer, which summer right now, in the summer, there's nothing worse than not being able to, cook your food, and, food's going off and the freezer's gone off, and, all the tenants have just done like their weekly shop. Oh my goodness, the fridge is not working. They've lost hundreds of pounds of food in their fridge and their freezer. Whether you compensate them is up to you. It depends. I've worked with lots of different landlords and property managers. Some will compensate, some will not compensate. If it was your own home and you've put all this food into the fridge or freezer, who's compensating you? No one. So whether you decide to compensate is entirely up to you. So you as a person, you as a team, need to make sure you communicate well and respond very well to maintenance issues. Along with you and your team is your tradesman. What kind of tradesman do you have? Have you made sure that you've done all the checks, so they have their insurances and all their certificates and everything up to date? Their property, like their liability insurances. Are they willing to take any responsibility if they go to the property and they cause damages? Those kind of things you need to make sure that you've button down and have in your contracts that you have with the tradesman, because there's nothing worse than getting a tradesman which you think is wonderful, go to the property and they make so much mess, the tenant is extremely upset. So the tradesman that you go, whether they're an individual that's not part of your team, a third party, whoever the tradesman is, that tradesman is going to interact with the tenant on your behalf. They're going to think they're part of your team, even if your company is called Property Incorporated, and a tradesman comes and they're called Tradesman Incorporated. The tenant is going to see the tradesman as being part of your team. So you need to make sure that all tradesmen that interact with your tenants are kind, friendly, get on with the job, leave the place in a tidy condition, and the tenant isn't left upset. Now, I'm sure like many people during lockdown, we all wanted to make sure our properties were full with paying tenants. During lockdown, that was pretty much all we was concerned about. Wherever the tenant came from, we just wanted to find a tenant to fill the property and make sure the rent was paid, make sure the mortgages was paid, insurance was paid. If you're a HMO, you just wanted to make sure all the utilities were paid, and you didn't necessarily have to worry about having any empty properties. So in this example, got a tenant and his brother into a single let property on behalf of a property manager. Actually, all the references were perfect. The referencing was done by a third party, so we wasn't necessarily involved in all of that. So we had to take the information from the tenant referencing company, and all looked good. Everything wonderful. Moved them in, checked them in. Everything was wonderful. The first few weeks went really well. But literally, like the second month, I'm not too sure what happened. Maybe they were putting on some sort of disguise or something. But then it all went downhill very slowly after that. Their music was really loud. They were disrespectful to the neighbors. They came in, in the evening, not saying, night work is no problem with night work, but they play their music loud at nighttime. Their voices were very deep. Not that's a bad thing, but because it was so deep, they spoke really, really loudly and very, energetic in their speaking. And, the people, the walls were paper thin. I mean, let's face it, that doesn't really help. But because of that, they didn't really adjust the way they were living according to the property they were living in. They thought they were living in like a 5-bedroom mansion, so they spoke really loudly for no reason at all and disturbed everybody in the property. Now, because it was only like 2-3 months into their tenancy, we couldn't evict them. There's no eviction process during that time. And on top of that, because of lockdown, the government said we weren't allowed to evict anybody. So they had to basically stay in the property. It was an absolute nightmare for all the property owners that were at the property, because they were constantly emailing and complaining. We had meeting upon meeting via Zoom, spoke to the tenants via WhatsApp. I don't always recommend WhatsApp, but spoke to the tenants via WhatsApp, spoke to them via email, having more meetings. I mean, as a property manager, that's kind of the very, very worst case scenario when it comes to having, a good tenant or a bad tenant. Sometimes you can do all you possibly can to have, a good tenant, do all the referencing, do all the viewings, do everything like that. And then, they could be putting on some sort of facade when it comes to, presenting themselves like some people do. We all kind of, you know, sometimes present a facade, but these people, they were so naughty. You know, eventually at the end of their contract, they stayed for a little bit longer, and then they found somewhere else, and then they moved. Unfortunately, we couldn't serve a Section 21 because at the time, you know, the government was saying nobody can move. They halted all sorts of things. It was very, very challenging at that time. And all you can do as a property manager is just try and keep the peace. Trying to keep is so difficult and so challenging, especially when you have, you know, very difficult tenants. But all you can do is keep the peace. You can't take it personally, because the phone calls I was having, the emails I was receiving, the words that were used was something you would not want your grandma to hear. Good grief. But what can you do? You can't take it personally. You know, the people in the property, you know, the other people in the property, it was a flat, the other people in the property were being disturbed. You had to understand their point of view. And you know, the tenants, they were being extremely cheeky, but you know, you had to speak to them as well and be courteous to them. So, you know, keeping good tenants is, you know, so important. So important. When you don't have a good tenant, you want to, you know, get them out as soon as you can. But just make sure you're polite and, you know, considerate to all parties, because that's all you can do at the end of the day. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Just to refresh, I just want to make sure that in order to keep a very good tenant, that you do good viewings, you do good tenancy referencing checks, and you have a really nice property, and that you yourself is very polite and courteous to all of the tenants that you interact with in your property. So in order to keep a good tenant, just do what you can in order to make sure that they stay. So hopefully you got a few tips from today's video. So please watch the next one, because it'll be just as helpful as this one.